So it is your side for Daniel Malka's father, Gadi ben Israel. We'll say this shiur le'ilui nishmato. All right. I'm going to screen share the text. We're almost done with the Hakadama. So I'm going to go back a bit, just so that we know where we're in. And we are basically just finishing here with Harambam talking about the close of the Gemara. And he says, and he's pulling this straight from the Gemara, because the Gemara says, Ravina v'Rav Asher him sof hora'ah, right? That Ravina and Rav Asher were the end of the period of giving over Torah from the Ma'atikei Shmuah. I'm forgive me for those who are here for the first time. I'm continuing based on things that we've said in the previous parts of the series, essentially. So forgive me if I'm not explaining in the most detail, but I'm happy to answer questions perhaps at the end if you like. So look at 29, right? Nimsa Ravina v'Rav Asher v'havrehem, Ravina and Rav Asher, who closed the Talmud essentially, and their friends, Sof Gedolei Chachmei Israel, Hama'atikim Torah Sheba'al Peh. They are the ends of the great Chachamim of Israel, and I explained what that meant last time. That were copying, right? That were transmitting from one to the next. The word Ma'atik literally means to transport. Literally, we find that with Avraham Avinu, Vayatik Misham. It says, right? He went from one place to the other. So they are the ones who Ma'atikesh Torah Sheba'al Peh. They take the Torah Sheba'al Peh and transport it from one generation to the other. Remember that we established in a few times back, right, that the Torah Sheba'al Peh is a unique thing, as opposed to what Harambam called Gemara. And what we said was that the Torah Sheba'al Peh is finite. There is a very clear corpus that we refer to as Torah Sheba'al Peh, just as there's a very clear corpus that we refer to as Torah Shebichtav. And then there's the elucidation, elaboration, creativity, insights, chidush, and so on, that the Rambam puts under the category of Gemara. So here Rambam is talking about Torah Sheba'al Peh specifically, which is finite. If you weren't there for it, we've recorded the classes. You can go back and hear those classes. That's going to be important moving forward. When the Hachamim made decrees, established these particular behaviors and ways of doing things, in Higu Minhagot, they have customs that they established. Upashtu gizrotam v'takanotam minhagotam bechol Israel, and the takanot and the gezerot and the minhagot that they established spread to, and I cannot stress the importance of this enough, Kol Israel, the entirety of the Jewish nation, right? The entirety of the Jewish people. Bechol mekomot moshvotehem, everywhere they were. So that is important because the Rambam is going to use that, and he's going to come back to that more than once, to establish the authority of the Gemara. Because remember, the last Bet Din Gadol we had was when? Who remembers? I mean, I don't expect everybody to remember, but I'm asking. When was the last Bet Din Gadol, according to the Rambam? The last Sanhedrin.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai.
No. When's the last one?
Tiberia?
Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He says that the last Bet Din Gadol that we have official is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. After that, there's Batei Din, but not a Bet Din Gadol. And so the Mishnah, according to Rambam, becomes the source text for Torah Sheba'al Peh. And only the texts that are connected to the Mishnah, around the Mishnah, authoritative in connection to the Mishnah, and we're going to see that as far as Rambam is concerned, there are only 5. There are only 5 works that can officially be considered Torah Sheba'al Peh, but the Mishnah is the last Bet Din Gadol. So all of the developments on that will have to be questioned whether they come into Torah Sheba'al Peh officially or don't come into Torah Sheba'al Peh officially. But it seems pretty clear that Harambam understands the authority of the Gemara, which would question, if that's the case, that the Mishnah is the last Bet Din Gadol, then what's the authority of the Gemara? To be able to be binding on us in the manner that we understand it to be. And Harambam essentially says the reason why the Gemara is binding is not because it was a Beit Din Gadol, but because it was Kol Israel. And because it was mitpashet b'chol Israel, it has the authority in its binding nature halachically on us. There are differences. There are differences in the authority of the Talmud and the authority of the Mishnah and our requirements to them, which we may or may not get into tonight. We'll see. But there are differences. Subtle differences, but differences that are important nonetheless. So he continues, right? This is b'chol mokomot moshvotehem. Now, it's not just that it spread to all of the places. The ones who established it were also kol or rov, he says, Chachmei Israel. So here, I think he says it up here. If was it? No, we'll see it as we go along. I won't take time for this. Okay. Ahar bedino shel Rav Asher, right? After the bedin of Rav Asher, shehiber Talmud b'yemei beno Gemaro, nitpazru Israel bechol haratzot pizur yeter. So now he's taking that strand of Kol Yisrael, and he's showing that the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh and its transmission ceases because of the dispersion, right? So ahar bedino shel Rav Asher, shehiber Talmud b'yemei Nitpazru Yisrael. They spread out. Bechol haratzot, among all the lands. Pizur yater, further, diaspora. Ve'egiu leketzavot uliyim harechokim. They got to the far lands, far off islands that were way away from their home. V'ravta ketata ba'olam. And there was a lot of strife in the world, right? So the world was not settled. There was a lot going on. The world was all over the place. And the actual pathways of travel were obstructed as a result of it. We read this last time, I'm just reviewing, right? The study of the Torah in its centralized nature went away. It fell apart. See, that's one problem with digital text. No? Where am I? Oof. Yeah. Oh gosh, how far to jump? Okay. Ken. Ken. So what ended up happening? You had isolations of massive groups of Israel were now isolated and on their own. So Yehidim Misridim Asher Hashem Koreh, in each place there were special people, very intelligent people that were very spiritually motivated, and they studied Torah. In every city, B'chol Medina Medina, and in each country. Torah. And they would study to try and understand the Hiburim of the Hachamim. And they would try to understand the nature of Mishpat. What's the law? Based on what it is that we have in our hands. Now, this is very important. Every Bet Din that came up after the Talmud, Bechol Medina Medina in every country, and established decrees or constructs of behavior or minhag to their own country, or livnei medinot, or to various countries that might have been around them. The key there is lo pashtu ma'asav bechol Israel. It just didn't spread. This is why, by the way, I just want to take a pause because somebody was asking me about this earlier in the week. They're asking, why should we care about these minhagim that the entirety of Am Yisrael does? If we don't find that there's source for it necessarily in the Rishonim, or we don't find that there's source for it in the Talmud or something of that nature. And what I always say, because it's not the first time I've heard that question many times, what I always say, if there's a minhag that has spread to the entirety of the Jewish people, you better bow your head in reverence to that minhag, because it is the rarest of things. It's the rarest of things. We don't agree on anything. and you have minhagim that spread to the entirety of Israel, like, for example, Simchat Torah. What kind of craziness is Simchat Torah? Who said Simchat Torah should be a thing, ever? The contrary. The Hachamim, when Simchat Torah came out, all the Hachamim wanted to stop Simchat Torah because they thought it was a disaster. And all of a sudden, like, there's one or two people that want to be smart and say, we never did this. Okay, Chazak Baruch, we never did this, now we do. And if you have something that spread to the entirety of Klal Yisrael, do not take it lightly, because things like that do not happen by accident. They don't just happen, as fluke. And so you have to.
What if you get a really stupid minhag?
Who said it's stupid?
No, I'm talking about that one.
It doesn't matter. Who said it was dreidel?
Yeah.
Who said it's stupid?
Well, it's gambling.
I'm not saying the dreidel game. I'm saying the fact that we spin dreidels on Hanukkah. It's German tops. Why should we do it?
No, I'm thinking there are stupider things than that.
It's not stupid.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's not stupid. Don't.
Yeah, but I wasn't talking about that. There are stupid things.
All right, go. Which one? Go ahead.
I don't know. What's it called? Schlitzelchala.
That is not something that the entirety of Klal Yisrael does, Daniel Jonas.
It isn't now.
No, it's not. No, it's not strong. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. If it is something that genuinely will take across the gamut, then I will shut up about it. I'm not kidding. I really will. I don't believe it will. I don't think that it has the capacity to do that. But if that's something that spreads like that, then I will shut up about it. It's not stupid anymore. That's what I'm trying to say. If the entirety of the Jewish people across the spectrum do something, it's not stupid anymore.
Kaparot? Minhag.
What is it?
Kaparot.
It's not across the spectrum. Spanish and Portuguese never did it. There's plenty of Jews that don't do it. Plenty.
But taking your argument that it's spread around now with like the internet and stuff like that.
But people don't end up doing it. That's what I'm trying to say. It could be a very great number of people, but there is definitely people that just don't hold from it. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you have something that organically spread across the entire Jewish nation and everyone does it, that is not something you should take lightly. You have yet to tell me one. I haven't heard from you one, aside from what I'm saying, but it's
Rabbi, I think none of them are universally accepted.
It's not
always going to be.
I'm not talking about individuals. I'm saying groups of people, right? Communities across the board. You will not find a community unless maybe you go to the Jews, the old Jews of China or something that have been separate from the rest of the people for their entire existence. Yeah, you will not find a people that don't recognize Simchat Torah as a thing, as a Moed in Israel. You will not find it anymore. There was a time very not long ago, less than 500 years ago, and nobody knew what the heck it was. You understand how absurd that is? How crazy that something like that should spread organically throughout the entire nation? It's nuts. Nuts.
So who is to determine when something has reached that point?
When it does.
Yeah, but how's it measured?
It either does or it doesn't, Daniel. I mean, you can't have one.
No. I'll accept that it does. If you can measure how it does. You can't measure how.
I don't need to measure. All I need to do is say, can you go to every Jewish community across
That's
the board?
a measure.
Okay, but that's just empirical. You look at it and you see. It is. It's all over the place. What do you want to do? It doesn't take much to realize that.
Black hats.
What is it?
Black hats.
Oh, are you kidding me, Joseph Cohen? Are you nuts? No, I'm not kidding. Stop it. I don't understand. How clear do I need to be? I wear a black hat. My community wears a black hat. The entire Dati Leumi world wear black hats? What are you talking about? I said the entire Jewish people. For goodness sake.
But Rabbi, there's no denying that sometimes the entire Jewish people also make a mistake.
What?
I'm saying that there's no. I don't think we can deny the fact that sometimes the whole Jewish people have made mistakes together.
Give me an example.
For instance, the golden calf. The golden calf was most of the Jewish people.
Listen to me. Listen listen.
You guys are on that Zoom call?
Why don't
I'm on
I?
a Zoom
Who's
call.
on
He's on a
mute?
different one.
Who's on mute?
We're all zooming it out.
Asaf, you need a mute.
I'm not talking about when the Jewish people are all in one place. I'm talking about the exact opposite. I'm saying that after Bnei Israel were mitpazer all over the globe, and something happens after they're mitpazer all over the globe that they all accept and hold, that's special. There's something very special and unique about it.
I also think that nowadays we are a lot more sheep than back in the day. Like back in the day when they were in Sinai.
No, oh, what do you mean? The entire world fell hook, line, and sinker for Shabtai Tzvi. They were not sheep?
Yeah, they were, exactly.
Okay, would you think that there was ever a time where people were not sheep?
No, that's my point. It's always like that. So it could be that the whole Klal Israel accepted something because we're just sheep.
It doesn't matter.
Necessarily mean that it's...
What I'm trying, I don't know. You guys are not hearing what I'm saying. How fascinating. What I'm trying to say, let me try and clarify what I'm saying again. I'm saying if there is a phenomenon where the entire Jewish people, as they are situated across the globe, adopt a custom that happens organically, right? Not by force, it happens organically. It is something that is noteworthy and is not to be dismissed lightly. That's all I'm saying. It's important to recognize how rare it is. And I'm talking even from a theological standpoint, unabashedly, if there is something like that happens throughout all of Klal Yisrael, the Am as a whole does not accept things en masse lightly. The Jewish people just don't do it lightly. It doesn't matter that it happened because they're sheep. There's 100 things that we do because we're sheep that has not spread through the entire nation. But there are some things that have. Rare things, very few things. You can count them on one hand, probably. Kal Nidre. It's nuts. From where? From where? Who the heck all of a sudden Kal Nidre should have any connection at all to Yom Kippur? Everybody does it. So that's what I'm saying. I don't want to waste class time on that. You can disagree with me. You are absolutely free to disagree with me by all means. I'm not forcing my opinion down your throat in any way, shape, or form. I'm just calling your attention to it, and you can contemplate it if you wish. But that's my feeling and my thought. So, given that, lo pashtu ma'asa b'chol Israel, the Batei Din simply did not have the ability to spread throughout all of Israel, and because there were geographical limitations, מפני רוחק מחשבותיהם ושיבוש הדרכים, היות בית דין של אותה מדינה יחידים, and that בית דין, they're singular בית דין, they don't represent the whole of Am Yisrael, any בית דין, anywhere. ובית דין הגדול שומעים בטל, and the בית דין הגדול was nullified מכמה שנים קודם חיבור התלמוד, many years before the Talmud was even authored. לפיכך, therefore, אין כופין אנשי מדינה זו מנהגים במדינה אחרת. We do not force the Jews of Venice to follow the customs of the Jews of England. They have absolutely no requirement to do so. The customs, the laws, no requirement to do so whatsoever. And we do not force one Bet Din to accept the terms of another Bet Din, the decrees of another Bet Din at all. Now, this is very interesting because this is unique. It was unique in the world for many, many years until now. Not only that, if one of the Geonim, and the Rambam is going to explain who a Gaon is in a second, right? But if one of the Geonim, essentially the Hachamim, come after the close of the Talmud, they say that the nature of judgment should be this way. Meaning, what does it mean, judgment? Halakha should be like this. If one of the Geonim, they study the Talmud, and their establishment of the Talmud for a unique case say that the judgment should be like this, and another Bet Din that comes after that Gaon, or another Hacham that comes after the Gaon, says, no, I think the Gemara means something else. We have no requirement to listen to the first guy. We follow whoever it is that we believe we should follow. We know whatever our da'at tells us, which tells you something. Nobody's under obligation to listen to any particular posek nowadays. You can choose the posek that you wish to follow, but there's nothing externally binding on anybody to follow any particular posek. Not to mention the fact, even if you do hear a particular posek that you follow and recognize and accept, and another posek comes after him, and he rules differently than that previous one, and you find it to be more in line with what's going on and developed, obviously it needs to be an informed awareness and decision and understanding. It has to be a hacham who's assessing it, because you can't have an ignoramus assess the words of a hacham appropriately. They don't know what the heck they're talking about. You don't have to follow the first guy, follow the last guy. You follow whichever one you think is more appropriate. Ben Rishon, Ben Aharon, as the Rambam says. So I hear a psak of Hacham Ovadia, I think is great, wonderful, appropriate. My son hears a psak of Hacham, and then he hears a psak of Rav Asher Weiss, and he thinks that the Rav Asher Weiss had a broader understanding, had them more into consideration, so on and so forth. He has every right in the world to follow Rav Asher Weiss. There's no external determinations on that. Again, it has to be an informed decision and understanding. These are not laws for Amei Haaretz. Udvarim alalu, all of these things, bedinim, gzerov, takanot, minagod, shinachat, ahar, chibur, Talmud. This, what I just said, says Rambam, this applies to all of these elements that come after the Talmud. Aval kol advarim shebetalmud babli. But everything that is mentioned in the Talmud, hayavin kol bet Yisrael lalechet b'hem. The entire house of Israel must follow. And we are kofeh, we force them. Kofin kol ir v'ir v'chol midam v'nehal v'chol v'nehagod shenahagu hachamim shebetalmud. We force the Jews across the globe to follow the Talmud. However it is that we can force them, right? Used to be much easier to force people. We expect people to accept their decrees and their takanot, right? Their statutes. The reason being, of course, and this is key, not because they were the Bet Din HaGadol. Notice what Harambam says. Because kolotam advarim shebetalmud, because all the stuff that's recorded in the Talmud, hiskimu alehem kol Yisrael. The entire Jewish people accepted. Ve'otana hachamim, not only that, but the rabbis themselves who established it, or decreed, or established a minhag, or established a particular deen, or halakha in the Talmud. The way it happened was, it was him kol hachmei Yisrael or ruban. The hachamim was established also either the entire corpus of hachamim of Israel, or the majority. And so Harambam is saying something fascinating over here. He's saying that when the whole of Israel accepts something, and the whole of the hachamim establish something, it's binding. We have no authority to not follow it. These people in the Gemara, they heard the Kabbalah, ish mepi ish, ad Moshe Rabbeinu, as Harambam spent all that time before delineating. Yeah. Kol hachamim she'amdu ahar chibur Talmud ubanu bo. Now all the hachamim that came after the Talmud and started to build upon it, right? Whatever they had. They became very well known because of their scholarship. We call those guys Geonim. That's who we mean when we refer to the Geonim. That's what Gaon means, right? They're famous. Gaon is well known. There were Geonim all over. There were Geonim in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Shinar, which is, Bavel, Iraq, Bisfarad in Spain, Bitzorfat in France, Limdu Derech Talmud. They all based their scholarship on the Talmud. They understood the path or the way of the Talmud. And they brought to light all of its elements that were concealed. And they explained its different elements. Why? Because the way of the Talmud is quite deep. It's not easy reading by any means. It's not an open book. I mean, remember, these Geonim were very likely reading the Talmud, not necessarily with Rashi, even though Rashi came very, very early on. It wasn't prevalent in everybody's hands. You didn't open a Vilna Shas in these days. You were reading the Talmud from scrolls. Maybe you had the special scroll of Rashi, which is why Tosafot always refers to it as the Kuntris. right? The Kuntris is the scroll, the treatise of Rashi. We're spoiled. Yeah. It's very deep. Not to mention, it's not just that the thinking is deep and the nature of its presentation is difficult to get. The language is off. I mean, it's in Aramaic. Who speaks Aramaic anymore, says the Rambam. Nobody knows that language. At the time of Me'oravim, it's not just Aramaic. There's plenty of Greek in there. Persian words are in there. Ancient Persian words are in there. A whole bunch of different stuff is in there. Latin, yeah. Aramaic was known to everybody in that region, in Bavel, at the time the Talmud was established. So they wrote it in the vernacular, which is astonishing. But in all the other places, and even in Bavel during the days of the Geonim, and no one was speaking Aramaic anymore. You had to actually learn it in order to be able to understand the Gemara in the first place. So it was a closed book. It was impossible to understand. And what ended up happening was there was a whole era of questions being sent to the scholars because people find, okay, so Talmud or whatever it is that you have, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't dealt with, a whole bunch of stuff people didn't know, and so they would just send questions to the scholars. And that's where you get the Shelot or Chuvot, right? Questions and answers, what we call the responsa. Tons of questions were sent in every city to the Gaonim, wherever they were, because they would study the Talmud, the people. They would have a whole bunch of questions about what the Talmud meant, and they'd ask questions to the Gaonim. The Gaonim would answer however it is that they understood. What does it mean, Kefi Chochmatam? It's very important, that line. Kefi Chochmatam. Why does Rambam say that? Why did he just say? They answered them as they understood, because there wasn't this uniform authority. There may be greater scholars, weaker scholars, scholars that were experts in one particular area of law, scholars or experts in a different area of law. It was very, very individualized, very specific. And the people who asked the questions, they would gather the answers as much as they could. You see Rambam, when people would ask him questions, he would write back the answer on the back of the paper that came with the question because he couldn't find paper. He didn't have, not going to waste paper with a whole new answer. He would just write it on the back and send it back to them. So the only answer we have was sent away to the guy. Rambam didn't keep copies of his answers. If he had anything, was whatever he did end up keeping was thrown into the Genizah. And then they would author books in order to be able to understand them. Every generation, the Geonim themselves wrote books on specific elements of law because they were experts in they were specialists in specific areas. And they would explain the Talmud. Some of them would deal with specific areas of law. Some of them would deal with particular chapters that in those days they had difficulty with. There were some people that would explain a particular masechet or even a whole seder. Very, very rarely did you have a full perush of the entire Talmud by anyone. That didn't happen, right? Very rarely. You have the Rif. They also wrote halachot, mutar to do this, asur to do this. They would write books like that. In what? B'inyan asur v'mutar, hayav v'patur, b'dvarim she'ashat tzricha lahem. They would write things that were pertinent to the time, that were required at the time. All of this, all of it, the responsa, the writing of halachot, the teaching of particular issues, were all to explain the Talmud. That was it. It was just to understand the source text. And the source text was an enigma. And so the Achamim had the responsibility of opening up the enigma. That was what they did. They would know how to understand the depths of the Talmud. That was the work of God that all the Geonei Israel worked on in that time. From the day that the Talmud was authored until today, says the Rambam. That's what's been going on. It's the 8th year after 1108 years since the Bet Midrash was destroyed. Throws that in there. All right, questions up until now? I'll bring this back in a second.
Hi, clarify something.
Rav Shmuley.
Hi. We talk about the power of a minhag, which has been accepted by everyone. Going back to that point, you're saying it's actually legally binding on everyone at that stage, or it just deserves to be revered?
I'm not saying that it's legally binding, no. I'm saying that we must be extremely reticent about dismissing it as not binding. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Rav, if the Tanaim didn't write the Mishnah, the Gemara in in a language that's most known to the Jews, such as Biblical Hebrew, then did they not expect that to be the last text written? Like, did they think that they wrote it only for the people of Babel? Like, did they not think that
why did they write it in the vernacular?
Yeah.
There are many theories as to why they wrote it in the vernacular. I can't say confidently why. I think that they wrote it in the vernacular because the language was more nuanced. And so it was much richer in order for them to be able to speak what it was that they needed to speak. And that's why they don't even suffice with the Aramaic. They bring in Greek, they bring in Persian, they bring in Latin, bring in all different languages. And they do that in order to be able to get their points across, to be able to give the nuance that was essential to them in the Talmud. It's very different than the Mishnah. The Mishnah is frugal and succinct and economy. And it needs to be, they wanted it to come out in Lashon HaKodesh. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted Lashon HaKodesh. But Lashon HaKodesh is a very poor language. Very poor. I don't mean poor in quality. I mean poor in words. It doesn't have.
I mean, the Torah gets its point across.
Which is why, by the way, in Israel today, in modern Israel today, 50% of the language is English. They have no words. It's a disaster.
Just going back to what Rav Shmuley was saying about minhagim. So the Breslovers have a minhag of saying tikkun klali every day because it can be mitak and everything. Right. We have to delineate, and we have to have a cutoff point where we say this is a minhag and this is not a minhag, because.
But why are you bringing?
Where do you draw the line?
Rabbi Elisha, why are you bringing that? It has nothing to do with what I was saying.
No, but I'm talking going back to minhagim.
Okay.
Where do you draw the line? Because you have people who came 300-400 years after the Rambam instituted things as so-called minhagim, but they're not really minhagim. And
okay, I know, but
nonsense.
Yeah, well, you're talking about minhagim. What is the origin of the minhag? Which is another discussion entirely. It's not necessarily for now. I don't mean to dismiss it, Chas v'shalom. It's a very important point you're making. But that's a question of what constitutes a bona fide minhag.
Yes.
Right? So, okay, that Harambam is not dealing with over here. When he says minhag over here, he's assuming that it comes from the Chachamim and it's a bona fide.
From the Chachamim, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's actually on the program, Rav, that topic.
It's a massive topic. It's a massive.
Tikkun klali?
No.
No,
that's when you know we've really lost the plot when we're doing that.
Yeah. Rav, I'm not sure if you clarified this point.
Who's Eli Shabi? Who's Eli Shabi? How do I say your last name?
He's a very special new member, Shaubi.
I'm reading your comments over here. Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Nachon. Hamakom gorem. Yefeh. Yeah.
Rav, I'm not sure if you clarified this, but I'm not entirely sure I understand why the Gemara was seen to be like the final kind of piece that everyone agreed on, because even in the Gemara, I mean, there's stories where half the communities disagreed and didn't go with the consensus over there. So why is it that we kind of say, oh yeah, the Gemara was kind of final and we all kind of agree with it? Especially also you've got the Karaites who never agreed with it. So the whole of Klal Yisrael never agreed with it. So why is it binding?
Right. I think that, the Karaites never accepted the system itself. Forget about the Gemara. They didn't accept the system of Torah Shebaal Peh at all itself. So we didn't recognize them from then as part of Klal Yisrael. Whenever it was, that you want to look at it historically. I'm no historical expert, so I don't.
When you say the system, surely the system.
The system of Torah, the acceptance that Torah Shebaal Peh is a thing, that it's part of Torah, that it's part of the nature of what we call Torah.
Right.
There's no acceptance, so that's not shaykh.
But surely that point is only a point because we believe in Torah Shabbat.
Of course, but then you're talking about the fundamental wiring of the enterprise. You're saying that Torah,
as stated by Torah Shabbat Peh.
Absolutely.
So how can we say that is a universally accepted point when it wasn't?
Because when I say universal, right? I mean, excuse me, I'll make the caveat. When I say universal, I'm talking about universal within the system that we're talking about.
Right. Okay.
Obviously, if you're not part of the system bichlal, then it's not shaykh to discuss it.
Okay. No, fair enough.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yoshua bin Zadon has been patiently waiting with his blue hand up or his white hand against the blue background up while everybody's been coming in and asking questions. Go ahead, Yoshua.
Yeah, so I wanted to know, where does the Rambam put the Yerushalmi on?
Right there with the Talmud. You'll see. I told you there's 5 texts. There are 5 texts. The Talmud Yerushalmi is right on par with the Talmud Bavli. And you see the Rambam uses it all the time in his psak. Yeah. Ohad.
When he says that once a Gaon says something, we don't necessarily have to follow him. He says, "V'nitber lebet din acher," that it's if it comes apparent to a different bet din. But is that also open to individuals to disagree?
He's not talking about a bet din. He's talking about a bet din in general that's going to be an authority, right? So like I said, individuals, it's very rare that it used to be, let me explain. It's a good question. We don't realize what it is the Rambam is saying because we don't live that way anymore. Until very recently, I mentioned this last time, until very recently, every city had a bet din. And the bet din was the halachic authority. Or they had, what they would call the Rav Ha'ir, and his bet din, yeah? But that's just how everybody set everything up, always. That's why I said here in London, the bet din is ours. Our bet din was the first bet din. When I say ours, I mean the S&P. There's a chutzpah, all of a sudden, the Ashkenazim came in and they started their own bet din. Whoever said that you're allowed to do that? Maran in the Avkat Rochel, in Shelot Shubot Avkat Rochel, he says absolutely asur to do that. And still, at least, I said in the Gittin that they write, it shows that you have to be careful because in the Gittin that the Ashkenazim write in this city, they write it with the spelling of the Sfaradim because it's Minhag HaMakom. We were here 100 years before them. But the point is that every city had a bet din. Today, it's so foreign to us because we just don't have anything. What's it? There's nothing centralized. Nobody cares. You got a bet din. I'll get 3 people together and do my own bet din. Right? Everybody has their own bet din. There's no authority b'chlal. We don't even know what the Rambam's talking about over here. Because our common experience today is that there is no authority. And that's why, you read the Rambam, he says, kofin. We force them to follow the Talmud. Who forces you? What do you mean? With what force? We don't even know what force means today anymore. How? You put people in harem. What do you mean? You take a whole city and put them in harem. And that's what they used to do. I mean, the poor Ramchal, what they did to him, still it was possible for them to blackball a person across the continent. And even then, at that time, it was much weaker than it ever was beforehand. He just carried on, I went to Amsterdam. Amsterdam, they were fine with him. They didn't care. Spanish and Portuguese as usual. They took him on. Okay. Did you hear that?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, can an individual, meaning even if
I said only to an individual, if you don't have the system of a bet din in a city, then yes, an individual can, if the individual knows what the individual is doing. I don't just mean like any individual. You have to have scholarship. You have to know what's going on. If you don't know what's going on, then of course not. That's hubris.
Right. So it's based on every time whoever is regarded as the authority.
That's why the Rambam talks about the Hachamim Shelo that didn't come to Hora'ah, Shu'alim Ktanim, Mehablim Kiramim. He writes later in Hilchot Talmud Torah about that. Can we go forward? Can I continue? Look, you guys, if you want to ask me questions, I don't know, maybe you're asking each other questions in this chat, but there's no way I'm reading through.
Yeah, there's a whole separate discussion going on, which is very exciting.
I'm not looking at the chat. I can't go through all those things now. Okay. Where are we? We finished, ubizman hazeh. Everybody back. Let's put this back up. Ubizman hazeh, right, in our times, takfu tzarot yeterot. It's just impossible out there, the Rambam's saying. I mean, it's just the stresses and difficulties are exceeding. I mean, the situation in the world now is just, it's oppressing everything, and it's suppressing everything. Our scholars know nothing anymore. I mean, you can imagine, this is the Rambam talking in his time. What would we give to be able to ask a question from 90% of the scholars of the Rambam's time? All of the people who ever understood anything is concealed. So therefore, even the things that the Geonim wrote in their times for their people, and at the time were very clear, in our days are just not understood. They're difficult to understand. Even the people who understand the Geonim today, the Rambam saying in his time, are very few. If they can't understand the Geonim, imagine the Talmud they can't understand. The Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Sifrei Toseftot, which incidentally are the 5 books that the Rambam considers to be Talmud Torah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. You need a really expansive knowledge, dot, connection to these things. V'nefesh hachama, you have to be a really intelligent guy to be able to deal with these things. And not only that, you need some time on your hands. Because even if you are massively intelligent and you have profound dot, it takes time to deal with these texts. When are you going to sit down and read the entire Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Bavli, Sifrei Toseftot, and become an expert in it? And that's before Instagram and Facebook and all this other stuff that's distracting us all over the place. You used to have quiet days, no telephones. How are you going to not only you have to learn them, then you have to draw law from them. Of course, this is exactly what the Rambam did. What he's saying, I mean, not everybody's poised to do this. And because it's such an impossibility, and because for that reason Torah is exceedingly inaccessible to us, I girded my loins. Ani Moshe Rabbi Maimon Hasfaradi, right? The Spaniard makes a point of saying that. Why does he make a point of saying that? He makes a point of saying that because he held that the Torah of Sfarad was supreme in the world at the time. That there were no scholars that matched the Torah of Sfarad. And he writes it. He writes this explicitly. It's not just me reading into this, right? And I leaned on the rock, blessed be he, which is God. And I sat to understand all those 5 books I just told you. Right? He doesn't say b'chol hasfarim, b'chol elu hasfarim. Those books. And I thought that it was appropriate to author things, words, that were clear from all of those books. B'inyan ha'asur, v'hamutar, ha'tameh, v'ha'taor, im she'ar dinei Torah. In the elements of what is permitted, prohibited, pure, impure, along with all the other laws of the Torah. Kulan, not only did I want to do that, I wanted it to be in clear and clean language. Lashon berura. And derech ketzara. I want it to be elegant. Elegant what? No cumbersome, not verbose, clean, clear. So now if I were to tell you, right, imagine if we had somebody who went through the whole Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Bavli, Tosefta, Sifra, Sifrei, all of the difficulties of it, the intricacies of it, the difficult to understand bits of it, and not only write out what comes out of it halachically, but write it out in beautiful language, in clean and elegant language, in clear presentation. you would say, wow, I mean, that's a pretty amazing work. It's not stam, gentlemen, that we hold the Rambam the way that we do. This was a super genius. This is a man that literally comes once. You can't understand, and he even tells you sometimes. If you read, I highly recommend, if you have not read the Hakdamot of Harambam on the Mishnah, in the various parts of the Mishnah, one of the most remarkable Hakdamot, and it's rare that people learn this Hakdamah because nobody learns the Seder, the Rambam writes a Hakdamah for the Seder Taharot. And I highly recommend that you learn through that. And in that, what he does is he gives the full outline and introduction, the whole framework he gives of the workings of Tumah and Tahara in the Torah. What the rules are, what the framework is, he goes through the entire thing. And in it, he says, you have no idea what I did for you here. He actually says it. He says, you know, I took a piece from here and 2 pieces from there, and I put it together in a full framework for you and presented you. He goes, learn it by heart. Here's what he says. He says, learn it by heart. Because you have no idea what I did for you here. And he did that, by the way, at 30. He was 30 years old, maybe younger, when he did that. Nuts. It's nuts. Absolutely remarkable. It's not stam. It's not stam. You think I quote the Rambam all the time, stam, because I have nobody else to quote? Yes, it's true. I have nobody else to quote. That's the problem, because nobody wrote what the Rambam wrote. Nobody dealt with what the Rambam dealt with. Nobody spoke the way the Rambam spoke. No one. No one. So he's unbelievable here. So he says, I did it. Ad sheteheh Torah sheba'al peh kula, so that I did it what? So that the whole of the corpus of Torah sheba'al peh, and he's talking about something very specific here. What? What comes out halachically from the Bavli, Yerushalmi, Sifra, Sifrei, Tosefta. That's Torah sheba'al peh. Everything else is Gemara, including what? The Midrash. All the rest of the Midrashim. That's Gemara. It's not halachically binding. And that's why we have a klal. We don't take halacha from the Midrashim. We take halacha from here. So what does he do? He puts it all together. And I did it in a way, without question, or peruk, or having anything disjointed. No arguments, just clear, straightforward law. What does krovim mean? Close? Accessible. That's what he means. They're clear, they're accessible, they're appropriate, they're proper. And all of it, and all of it is based on these chiburim, these works, these 5 works that are from the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh until now. Remarkable. I did it so adshu kol hadinim gluyin. I did it so that all the laws of Yisrael should be clear to everyone. Katan, gadol, young, old, bedin, kol, mitzvah, u'mitzvah. The laws that come from every one of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah, ubedin kol ha'dvarim shetiknu ha'achamim, and all the takanot that the ha'achamim established on that, and the nebi'im. Klalo shel davar, bottom line, says the Rambam, I made it so you do not need another book to know the laws of the Torah sheba'al peh. This is your one-stop shop. This chibur mekabetz leTorah sheba'al peh kula. Notice how particular. He doesn't say leTorah kula, or the Gemara, or the Torah sheba'al peh kula. A very clear, succinct, finite corpus of law. That's what he did. Ima takanot, I included in it the takanot and the minagot and gezerot shenasu. Now there are parts of the, anybody who studied the Mishneh Torah knows that Rambam included in that some things that came afterwards, and he says, Amru Geonim, Hagaon Amar, or he'll write Yira'eh Li. It seems to me that this is the halacha. And he does that to show this particular thing that I'm saying in the name of a Gaon or in the name of Rabotai or Yira'eh Li, that's not Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's an added element. It's part of Gemara. It's what I think the way we should do it. But he writes it to delineate it from the corpus of Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Right, but what you're saying that when he does that, he's basing it on a statement by the Geonim.
Or his own.
Or his own, right.
Or his rabbis. But there's several times where he says, Rabotai Pirshu ve'ani omer. My rabbi said this, but I say this. He disagrees. And because it's his book, he puts it in. Like a wonderful example of this is Hanukkah. Here, this is a nice example, right? Hanukkah. He writes, he explains the sugya of lighting Hilchot Hanukkah, how he understands it should be. What are you supposed to do if you want to do the Mehadrin Mina Mehadrin version of the mitzvah? Well, he says the way to do it is you light the lights according to the numbers of the people in the house. And then each night you add one for each. So he goes, if you have 10 people in the house, you light 10 the first night, the 8th night you light 80 candles. And then when he writes that, he says, however, minhag bechol arenu Sfarad, the custom in all of the cities of Spain is not like that. Not like I understand Harambam, Maimonides understand the Torah Sheba'al Peh law of the Talmud. Our minhag is different, and this is what we do. And he writes that as part of the halakha. This is our minhag. Why does he do that? Because he wants to show that the minhag of Sfarad is a bona fide minhag, and that they continue in their minhag. Why they're allowed to continue when he understands the Talmud this way, another discussion. I'm just showing that as an example. Right? Lefichach karati, therefore, since this is the whole of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, I'm calling this Mishneh Torah, the review of the Torah. Lefi she'adam koreh Torah shebechtav te'ilah. Why? Because you read, if you want to learn the whole of Torah, Torah shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, you read the Bible and my book, and you're good. You could read Torah shebechtav te'ilah, har kach koreh bazeh. Ve'yodea mimeno, and when you do that, you know from it Torah Sheba'al Peh kula. You know the whole of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And by the way, gentlemen, this hasn't changed since the days of the Rambam, because you cannot add to Torah Sheba'al Peh. We don't have the mechanism to add to Torah Sheba'al Peh. We don't even have a mechanism of Kol Yisrael or Kol HaChamim. Gemara is a different thing, but that's that. So if you ever ask, what should I learn? That's what you should learn. Before you learn the Gemara, that's what you should learn. Because you have a chiyuv to learn that. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn Gemara. Of course, Gemara, in the sense that the Rambam understands it, which is the developments and the creative elements and so on and so forth, that's part of Gemara, what we call Gemara, right? That's part of the Talmud, part of the Midrashim, it's part of all the wonderful, the Maharal, it's all part of the wonderful development, Rav Kook, all of it's beautiful, the Zohar, it's all wonderful stuff, great stuff. It's not Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's all we have to know. Okay, we're going to stop here, and then, now let's finish tonight. Let's go. So the way that I've structured the book is as follows, says the Rambam. I've set it up first with halachot. Each law is clearly delineated. And it's on every subject of the Torah. And in the halachot, I group them into chapters. And the chapters I group into, the other way, from top to bottom, right? The halachot are the general subjects. I then bring those subjects into chapters. I then break those chapters down into specific laws so that everything can be done al peh. You can know it by heart. It's easy to categorize in your head. So you have Hilchot Tshuva, that's the halacha. You have 10 prakim, Each perek is broken down into laws. You remember which laws are in which perek, you're good. You can even remember how many halachot are in each perek. Wonderful. And he really meant this very seriously. He believed people should learn his book by heart. And he tells the student, he tells his student Rabbi Yosef, you must learn my book by heart. He goes, limdad ba'al peh. Yeah, what do you want to say?
No, I was just saying that this appears to be the same sort of method that he said earlier. He's worried about the world is going to hell and everyone's going to find it, it's going to be difficult to communicate things. He's actually finding a way to memorize everything and make it transportable.
Yep, absolutely. By the way, Daniel, that's why in the Mishneh Torah, he writes a whole Sidur. And not only does he write a whole Sidur, he writes a whole Sefer Torah.
Yeah.
So you know how to write a Sefer Torah. You follow the book, you write it with the gaps, he puts it all in there because he wants it to be transportable. Another thing that he does to show your point, when he wants to number things, because he says, look, there are this many things for this or this many things for that. He will write at the beginning and at the end, this is the number, because he was afraid that the printers would miss one. And so he would say, so if he wrote 24 and all of a sudden you've got 23, then there's something wrong. We're missing something. He was very careful with all of that because of that reason. Okay? Now he goes, I want you to know, when you read these halachot, the halachot may be branches of one mitzvah. Like, for example, Hilchot Teshuvah. Hilchot Teshuvah is one mitzvah. The whole 10 chapters of Hilchot Teshuvah are tied to one mitzvah of the Torah. Vidui. Maybe that there's many words of the Hachamim on that one mitzvah. Or the Nevi'im. Then there may be some halachot that have many mitzvot in it. Right? There could be like Hilchot De'ot. Hilchot De'ot, Rambam has 6 different mitzvot that he includes in Hilchot De'ot. I mean, mitzvot from the Torah. Yeah? He gathers them differently. He goes, why? Because I've ordered this book on conceptual groupings, subjects, not mitzvot. Right? I haven't wrote it based on mitzvah groupings. I wrote it based on subject concept groupings. And so many mitzvot are connected in their conceptual elements and their subject elements, and so I put them together. As you'll see when you start reading. You must know, says the Rambam, that the number of mitzvot that for all generations we recognize are 613. Why does he say that? Because what the Gemara says. That's all. There are 248 positive commandments. A way to remember this, the numbers of the limbs of the body, whatever that is. There are some negative commandments, 365. That number of the years of the solar year, number of days of the solar year. And there you go. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Okay. Any questions before we end?
I think a few questions came in.
Rav, I don't know, complicate things. I know we've ended well, but like the critique that the Ravad gives on this, I mean, it's quite well known, the idea of that, everyone before him had given proofs, and yet the Rambam just states the halakha, and therefore it complicates matters because no one can come and disprove him if you don't give your reasons. It's a famous question, but I'm sure there's many answers. I don't know, but I haven't heard any, and maybe you could elaborate on that.
It's a very good question, and it's a very simple answer. The Rambam believed people would trust him. Why would he lie? That's all, number one. However, what he says in a Teshuvah is that he regretted not including sources, and he wanted to do it, but he was too old. And there was one point, there's a great story. He writes a story himself. He says somebody came to him, he was old already, he was in his late 80s. And a Talmid came to him, or one of the people came to him and said, where did you get this? We haven't seen this in the Gemara. And they point out this particular, it was a halakha and gitin. And he said, I don't know where he got this. And he couldn't remember. And he started freaking out. He started, the agti, like I was afraid that maybe I wrote a halakha that wasn't thing until finally I found the source and I wrote him where the source was. He's the best, the Rambam. And you guys are the best. Thank you for being here tonight. Wonderful to share with you, to learn together. So
We've had a great discussion in the chat as well. The next one
we shouldn't have discussions in the chat in the middle of shir.
No, they're good. They're all in the.
Yeah, you're lucky Sin is here because otherwise I'm much more ferocious.
For the sake of heaven.
he evens everything out. I don't like when people have sidebar conversations in the middle of learning. But go ahead.
It's only to enhance. Only to enhance.
Is it?
It is. You should have a look at them. Actually, really good comments by Ellie as well.
All right. You'll have to
and
tell
the rest.
This is mostly my fault. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'm just busting chops.
There was a question there. I think the last question by David Hazan. Why again did we say that Torah Shabbat does not include future works, wisdom, and commentaries?
You have to listen to.
That's that was the first. That's the first part. I'll send that over to David. Brilliant, Rav.
Okay.
That was fantastic. I think
lovely to spend the time with you all.
We're seeing you in a couple of. We're seeing you in a couple of weeks' time, I think, and then we've got a new series with you. We're going to be going through Sephardi principles, but through Teshubot.
So the next time that I will see you, it will be.
I think so. I'm going to check. I'm pretty sure it's in. I've got to double check.
It will definitely be after Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
Next so I wish everybody Tizkura Shanim Rabot, Naimot V'Tovot, Ta'arichu Yamim, B'Tov B'Na'imim, Yehi Ratzon Sheta'alu Ma'ala Ma'ala. בתורה, מצוות ומעשים טובים, בכל אשר תפנו, תשכילו ותצליחו, בעושר, עושר וכבוד, בכל טוב סלע. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody.